I'm working on my Bobcat 331 mini excavator, which has a lot of slop in the area where the bucket curls, specifically right up in here and down in here. I'll get a close-up on that. You see these 2x4s back here. That's just a brace to make sure the thing doesn't come down while I'm working on it, and then I have to start the thing up and raise it back up and keep going through that cycle. So it's just got some 2x4s braced up there and then down there against the bottom, and so the weight's already on them, so they'll hold it in that position for me. Okay, this area has two bad spots. One, you see the pin is able to move up and down. That's because it's sloppy where it goes through this part right here. And this joint right in here is sloppy, if you see that. And I'm going to fix both of those. One of the areas of concern is right in here. If you see, I can pick that up and it's pretty sloppy in there. And the same thing on this side. And then I got another spot that's really bad. And as you can see, that is inside the bottom of this cylinder. The eye on this cylinder is sloppy in there. Hopefully it's just the bushing, which is easy to replace. But if it is worn through the bushing and the hole or the bore going through this eye, if that is sloppy, then I might have an issue with that. I already got a box full of parts here from Bobcat. This is a little, like a schematic that they printed out for me, and it's got all the parts in this area, and then their names and part numbers on these sheets here. And so Bobcat is really good about helping me with that sort of thing. And this box of parts is just a number of the bushings that I knew we were going to need and some others that we might need. And so as I take things apart and get the bushings out, we'll match them up with these new ones and replace them as needed. And I got another thing I'm going to try, using some epoxy in an area that I know where the main bore is wallered out and the bushing fits loosely. I already tried this once, and when I realized that I had a problem with that bore, that I decided, well, I didn't have time to do it right then. And that was also before I started doing videos for YouTube. So I'm going to use some epoxy behind the bushing in the bore area, so that it'll fill in that gap and the bushing won't just be sloppy in there. And since it gets greased through this hole here, and it's hollow in here, and it comes out the middle, and that there, so I'm going to make sure that is all clean. And I'll clean this out with a screwdriver and stick a grease gun in there, and if it flows out of here good, then fine. If not, I'll just drill that hole out again and make sure I get it cleaned out where grease flows through it good. I'm going to knock this one out. I'm going to use a socket that fits, and I've got a hammer that's got copper in it, so that'll help keep from mushrooming the end of the socket. And as you can see, if I can get this thing in the camera, that crack is not natural. That's not that wasn't put in there on purpose, because you can see it's crooked, and it did that because of the constant hammering inside the hole. The bushing was loose in the hole, and otherwise that crack wouldn't be that wide. Before I take it out of the bag, I'm going to measure this hole. And I come up with about 1 9/16, slightly over. And let's see, before I take this out, how does that measure? About the same. So this one will fit snug in there. And then I'll measure the inside of this. Slightly over 1 3/8. And that's what size my pin is when I measure the pin on a part that is unused. Right out here, I get 1 3/8, or 1 3/75, which is 1 3/8. And it's a little bit worn in the middle, but we're losing about 9 or 10 thousandths. When you can, you try to open your bag nicely with a knife, so that if you have to return it, all you gotta do is put a slice of tape on it. But I tried knocking that out with a socket and a hammer, and it's not coming out, so I'm just gonna go ahead and cut a slot in it with a Sawzall, and then I'll knock it out. That'll loosen it up, then I'll knock it out. I changed my mind about the Sawzall. All it did was clean the surface and dull the blade right away, so I'm going to have to burn that out with a torch. I don't like using the torch inside the garage, but it's pretty cold outside and snowy, so I'm not going to do it out there. And I got a little deflector set up there behind it, sheet of cardboard behind the chair, to help catch some of the sparks, and I've got fire extinguishers, several of them sitting on the floor behind me. So I'm prepared in case something does light up. So what I'm going to do is light the torch and then just burn just that bottom edge right through the center there. I'll just get that bushing hot and not the board that it's in, and that'll burn the bushing right out of there without hurting the board at all. It's something I learned when I was an auto mechanic. That's how we took exhaust pipes apart, and it works really good. This is not working right. It's not, obviously it's not a carbon steel, the bushing, so it's not cutting like a torch should cut. I'm just puddling it away, so I'll pause it. Okay, we got that puddled out of there. Yep, there was two of them. One on each side. So now I got to clean out the hole. And I did burn into the board just a little bit in a couple spots, but that won't hurt anything. I'll just clean it up, and then so I'm going to let it cool down, and I'll clean that hole out and then put the new bushings in. This has a seal in here. I didn't find one on the other side. I don't know if it was just missing, or I guess that's the case. So I'm just taking a small screwdriver and getting this one out of there. Because they did sell me at Bobcat some seals to put in here. Okay, when putting a bushing in this case, one bushing is tapered more on one end than the other, so that end's going to go on the inside. Gives you a little bit more of a square area to use some sort of a drift to push it in from the outside. If it'll go in with the drift. If it doesn't, then I'll just use a piece of threaded rod and some nuts and big washers and drive it in or force it in with that. Just light taps with this copper hammer, and just so it doesn't fall out of there while I look for something to drive it in there with. I got those started in there pretty good. They're greased. The hole is greased. The bushings are greased, and I'm going to use these threaded. This one's a threaded rod, and it's longer. These are bolts. Take it off. Put it on there. The other side's the same as that side. Got a bolt in there, I mean a bushing in there. And if you can, you try to put it in centered. I got a little impatient with the ratchet. Got the tools, might as well use them. I forgot to put the camera on when I put this seal in, so I'm going to show how I put it in on the other side. I put it on this shaft all the way up to there like that, and then I put the shaft in the hole, and then I hammered the seal from the outside. I hammered it in with this hammer, with the copper on it. I'm going to do that over here on this side now. Put this one in. I don't know if that's the right way to do it or not, but it works for me. They're in there, they're tight, they're squared, they're not boogered up. But since these holes are wallered out, I'm going to epoxy these bushings in there with some epoxy and to fill in that gap. And that's one thing. I don't know how well that's going to hold. I don't know why it wouldn't hold, but someone else has done this before and without the without fixing the size of the hole, and the bushings just broke. So I'm going to put epoxy in there, and hopefully that will harden up enough to keep that bushing still, so that the pin is only riding on the bushing and not bouncing the bushing around inside the hole. So I'm going to clean those holes up, and then I'll get the epoxy out. This is what I'm going to try to use. I never used it before. It's for concrete. It's for anchoring studs and anchors in concrete. I guess it should be pretty good, because you could put like an L stud in concrete when it's wet, and or a bolt with a bolt head, and that holds good. But if you don't, then you want to drill a hole in the concrete and put this stuff in there, is what it's made for, to hold an anchor. So I'm assuming it's going to be pretty tough material. I've never used it before, but if it's strong enough to hold an anchor in concrete that wasn't put in the concrete while it was wet, then it ought to be strong enough to do what I need it for in this thing here. So, and if it turns out to be a bad idea, I'll definitely update this video later in 6 months or a year or two or whatever it takes to find out that that it's not working the way I wanted it to. So, because I don't like doing videos. I won't do videos on purpose if I didn't get to the bottom of the problem and get it fixed. But I don't know what else to do. They want like $3,000 to replace this part. So naturally I'm going to try this epoxy behind the bushing. As you see, these bushings are just real sloppy and loose in there. We can't have that. So I'm going to put some epoxy glue in there, and then we'll catch some more video when I get that done. Okay, this epoxy comes with this mixing tube that I'm not going to use because it only comes with one. I have to go to Home Depot and see if they sell these things separate. I'm certainly not going to use this much of it, and I don't want to waste this tube. So I've done some auto body over the years. I'm going to just use a box. It looks like I did I mixed some body filler on it before. I'm going to just squirt some of this out of here. It's going to come out in two different pieces, two different tubes in there. If you look inside the end there, two different colors. And so that's good that it's two colors. That way you know when you've got it mixed good. And the directions say, and I didn't even read all of the directions, but I saw at least 3 places where it said to use gloves. So I might need to be told twice, but not 3 or 4 times. I'm not going to find out the hard way why you need to wear gloves. So I'll just mix it. I'm going to use a paint stirrer instead of a plastic body filler spreader. And the gloves will come in handy. I'll just use my fingers to put it in the bore where I want to put it. Said to use it in a well-ventilated area. Well, my garage is pretty good size, and this has a strong ammonia smell. I wasn't expecting that. Know just how much time I have to work with it, but I'm thinking I have about half an hour. And of course, temperature will play a part in that. But the directions also stated that once it sets up, you have to remove it with tools. You can't wipe it up or just scrape it off. So it's supposed to be pretty tough stuff when it sets up. Okay, I got that pin in there to make sure that those two sides are lined up with each other. I didn't put the old pin in it because the old pin is worn some. This is a new pin, as you can see, with the gold color on it that was replaced not too long ago. And I pulled it out of this hole up here And there's something spring-loaded back in here that would have come apart and given me a little trouble putting it back together. So I just drove the old pin in behind the other end of this new one and just drove it out. So the old one was going in while this one was coming out, and so it just lined up everything and kept it from falling apart on me. So I'm going to let that epoxy dry now, and then we'll put this thing back together, at least that end of it. These bushings. Okay, I'm ready to put this thing back together. The epoxy has dried up. I've put grease on this shaft by hand. I greased up these holes, and I'm going to put some grease on these bushings to glue them in place while I assemble it. And then we'll put the pin back in. There it is. Put another washer on the other side of that pin and put this lock pin in it, and then it's done. But not completely, because I still got to do this one. Okay, now I'm going to start doing this pin on this one, and it's the same procedure as the other ones, except just a different location, and it is a little bit different pin because this pin here and this one here are held together. They're welded onto a bar just like this on the other side, and those two pins are part of that bar, and so these snap rings come off on this side, and then that whole assembly comes off on the other side. The Bobcat dealer told me that if I have to replace that thing, if those pins are worn out, I didn't get an exact price. They told me, but I forgot. I didn't write it down. It was like $300 and something, $400. So I'm hoping that I can just change bushings and get away with that and not have to replace this this section with those pins in it. So I'm just going to clean these the grease off of these, and then take those pins out. I guess everybody knows what snap ring pliers are. You gotta have one to get those snap rings off. I'll probably do another video on tools like that someday, but right now Someone that doesn't know what snap ring pliers are probably isn't going to be doing this. And I'm using that copper hammer again, so I don't mushroom the ends of these while I knock them out of there. Actually, coming off pretty good. They don't need much hammering. Take that one off and then we don't have to take those bushings out, they just fell out. We got a grease seal on both sides of this. Doesn't want to come out like that, so. There it is. And same thing over here. I found a socket that fits in there real nice, and it looks like it's going to drive that bushing out for me. I'm going to try it. I put the extension in it backwards so I have something to hammer on, and can't hammer on it extremely hard. It'll mushroom the extension, so don't use an extension that you've got to have if you try to do it this way. Let's see if this works. Looks like it's starting to move it. Yeah, it's coming out. Yeah. And of course, the farther out it goes, the less of it is in there. So the less of it in there, the less resistance. The easier it is to get the rest of it out. And that's just the opposite, putting them in. The more of it you get in there, the more resistance, and the harder it gets to finish putting them in. Well, I got the bushing out, now I got to get the socket out. Okay, I got my new bushing that I'm going to put in here, and I'm going to do the same thing putting it in as I did taking it out. I'm going to use a socket, put it on backwards. I got one that put it on the extension backwards and use it for a drift. And just going to put that on there, and it fits like a glove. I can't ask for a better fit. Line it up. I'm going to line up the hole. If you can see inside here, there's a groove in there that goes all the way around, and it lines up with this grease fitting. So if you don't get this hole lined up with the grease fitting. It's not going to hurt anything because the grease will go around that groove and it'll find its way into this hole and grease the inside of the bushing. That bushing has got grooves inside of it, and it'll get in there either way. But if you have a choice, try to line up the hole with the grease fitting, and then you still want to use this tapered end. Both of them have a slight taper, but there's a much bigger taper on this end, so it'll go in better that way. And it's better to use your brass copper hammer on the back of the extension if you can. If you don't have one, or you need a bigger hammer, it doesn't matter. Extensions don't cost that much if you do mushroom the end of it and you can't use it. You can always use it for driving sockets. That's fine for a little 6-inch extension. I'm looking on the other side so that the end of it matches up with the little shoulder that's cut in there for the seal to sit in. I think I'm there. Might get one more hit. Yeah, it'll be all right. Okay. I'll put the seals in and then put it back together. Okay, get this last joint off of here that's got a lot of slop in it. I'm going to change the bushings in that. We've got something a little bit different with this one because it's got this spring-loaded release lock that locks the bucket on, and you have to use this release bar on this model to get that off of there, to get the bucket off when you got to change your bucket. Got to put this thing in this hole there, pull it down, and get the pressure off of this bolt right here. So I'm going to stick a wrench on that bolt, and that is a 7/8 on this one, and there's a 13/16. Well, that's actually a nut 13/16 bolt on the other side. This is just a stop. You see the worn, it's got a worn spot right there. One corner is worn off, and that's just to keep this thing, it's just a stop for this thing to come up against. But I don't want any spring tension on that when I take that part off. I did it once before without taking that bolt out, and it was really tough working around these springs. So Now I can just take this thing off. Two pieces though, so I'm trying to keep them from falling and crashing on the floor. Actually held together pretty good and didn't crash on the floor. Well, I put the pin back in, and this is a worn pin. It's just one I'm using temporary. I'm going to put a new pin in. I put that back in this part, and when I move that up and down, it's got very little wear. Not enough to bother me for sure. So, but the middle of it does have some wear on the pin, so I'm going to replace the bushings on that piece on the floor, and these bushings are replaced already, but they need, I'm waiting for seals. Got to put seals in those. I'm going to replace these bushings in here on this part, and because that was pretty sloppy. I was cleaning up this lock that holds the bucket on, and I noticed that there's a groove right in here for grease. Grease cert right there. Grease fitting, nipple, whatever you want to call it. And that's good. I can clean this one out. And this one was getting grease anyway, but this side is completely smooth. No groove, but there's a grease fitting. So that grease has not been getting in here, and the groove, the channel, is completely filled in, and so I got to, like I'm doing right now, starting to just gouge it out of there and make sure that that is clear before I put this thing back together, or that's one place that grease won't be able to get into. So I'm going to make sure that's clear and the grease is going through these fittings. If the fittings are not letting grease through, I'll replace those as well. I got another sloppy bushing here. The one that on this side went in nice, but over here it's too sloppy for me, and it just falls right in there and it wobbles. So I'm going to mix up another batch of epoxy to put around the inside of that bore and fill in that gap. And since there's another bushing in there, I'm going to put the pin through it before it sets up to make sure that that bushing, that this loose one is in there straight.